Today on the All Kinds of Weather forecast, we talk once more about Cormani McClain. The former five-star prospect is back on the market and just visited Florida, and the rumblings are out there that he's about to visit the Gators again. Is there space for him on the Gator roster and in the Gator program? Does Florida really want him? And does he deserve this second chance? We'll talk about all that and more today on the All Kinds of Weather forecast. Welcome back to the All Kinds of Weather forecast. I am your host, Neil Schulman. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at All Kinds Weather. Also follow the show on Twitter at IAKOW Forecast. The All Kinds of Weather forecast on every podcast platform there is. As you may have noticed, we are more active now than we have been, so more shows are coming. You haven't already done so, definitely be sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, be sure to comment your thoughts on what we're discussing today below as well. And today we have a topic of conversation that is generating a lot of buzz in Gator Nation. We're talking about the apparent re-recruitment of once Florida lean, once Florida miss to Miami, once Miami Hurricane commit, and once Colorado Buffalo defensive back Cormani McClain. And the very fact that he has so many titles, beginning with the word once, has a lot to do with why some of y'all are probably watching this rolling your eyes right now, because you've heard enough. You've heard the kid's name enough. You've heard about the issues enough. And I'll say that I get it. I completely understand. There is a large part of me right now that's with you in that, in that having enough of Cormani McClain. But there's a reason why I'm talking about him today on the show, and that is because the Florida Gators appear to be seriously considering adding him to their roster in 2024. So today, now that there is a legitimate chance that his wild recruitment story could bring him back to Gainesville after all, we'll walk through 4 basic questions that various fans are probably asking or wondering, which are: how did he get to a point where he is considering Florida again? How did Florida get to this point where it's considering him again? What Cormani McClain on the Gator roster would look like? And does Cormani McClain deserve the chance to be a Florida Gator after all that's happened? So 4 big topics of conversation today, and let's get right into it. With one quick disclaimer before we start addressing those questions. The disclaimer is the story of Cormani McClain to this point is just not a pretty one. The facts are what the facts are. It's not bashing him to go into the details I'm about to go into. It's simply refreshing people's memories and explaining how 2 different parties got to this point in time. So while I cannot promise that the facts that have come out so far about Cormani McClain will make him look great, I can promise that by the end of the show, I will talk about him in a much more positive fashion. So if you bear with me, if we get through this, the ugly part of his story together, we will get to a much more positive outlook for Cormani McClain at the end. That is my promise. But let's go back to the beginning. The first and most important question to answer here is, how did Cormani McClain get to this spot? Well, for those of you who don't follow recruiting too heavily for any of a laundry list of valid reasons, or have just permanently erased your memory of Cormani McClain from your mind, he was a 5-star defensive back prospect out of the Lakeland High School Dreadnought program. Because of Lakeland's historical pipeline to Gainesville, because former Florida safety Ahmad Black coached him there, because of Napier's recruiting prowess, many thought that he would wind up a Gator up until the very last minute. Now, some things I cannot provide details on. Part of that is because I don't know all the details. Part of that is because I promised not to share the information. But what I can say, suffice to say, that something happened at the last minute that persuaded him to commit to Miami. If you know what it is, you know what it is. I'm not going to be the one to spread that around anymore, but something happened, we'll just say, that led him to commit to Miami and not Florida on October 27th of 2022, which blindsided the people that I know in that Florida program. And those people take a lot of pride in knowing everything. They don't like to be taken by surprise. So they undertake a lot of measures to make sure that they know what's going to happen before it happens. And they do a good job at it. They're very aware of a lot of things. This blindsided them. So that was a big shocker to Florida. when this went down. And the hint is that NIL was legal and very unregulated at that time, like even more so than it is today, if that's even possible. So that's what happened there. He became a Cane, but as the fall sort of transferred itself into winter, a man named Deion Sanders, who was then coaching Jackson State, began to seriously flirt with the idea of leaving for a Power 5 school. As it turned out, Sanders would wind up leaving Jackson State for Colorado. And this is actually important to note here. It's going to seem like a tangent for a second, but keep this in mind and put a pin in it because we're going to come back to this later. I talk about my close relationship with James Houston and the Houston family all the time, and he is family to me. So I've been to Jackson State for a game. I've seen the locker room. I've been in the locker room when Deion was there, and I've been in the locker room when Deion wasn't there. There's a real culture at Jackson State. Like HBCU love is a real thing. It's as genuine as it gets. The entire community, both at Jackson State itself and the overall city of Jackson, Mississippi, going all the way up to the mayor, they all shower the students with all the support they possibly can. Now, HBCUs, the fact is that they just don't have the funding of an SEC school or a Big Ten school. But what they can do for their athletes there, they do to make sure that they are not only happy, but they are built to succeed when they graduate their HBCU school. So, and I'm told that that's not just a Jackson State thing. That's at a lot of HBCUs. But anyway, the athletes at the HBCUs, including Jackson State here, are part of a mini society that is selfless and naturally inclined to look out for others and themselves in terms of their own best interests, as opposed to trading what you want now or trading what you want later for your instant gratification now. So just remember that for later. There's a good culture at Jackson State. There's a good society of good people there. Remember that, and we'll come back to that later. But now back to Cormani McClain. Deion Sanders, who left Jackson State to go to Colorado, then took about half his team with him. And I mean literally half his team. Obviously, there are the big stars like Travis Hunter, who he originally flipped from FSU at the last second. His two sons, Shiloh and Shador, went with him. Offensive lineman Tyler Brown went with him. Linebacker Jeremiah Brown went with him. Wide receiver Willie Gaines went with him. Running back Savion Wilkerson went with him. Linebacker Cam Silmon Craig went with him. Even their kicker, Alejandro Mata, went with him from Jackson State to Colorado. And Sanders also went to work importing a lot of players from other sources too. Like he took, for example, Florida offensive lineman David Connor. He also took receiver Xavier Weaver, who played against Florida for South Florida in 2021 and 22. He took another former Gator opponent in Kavasier Smoke from Kentucky, and he took a wealth of other SEC guys like Amari McNeil from Tennessee, Jacquez Robinson from Alabama, and he dipped into the high school ranks to get Cormani McClain from Miami at the very last second. Now, if the blindsiding itself wasn't a red flag, the tail end of that high school commitment process was, as pretty much everyone agrees on, talent is not the issue with Cormani McClain, and it never was the issue with Cormani McClain. So he was invited to participate in the All-American game in Orlando on January 3rd. And Matt Schick from ESPN went up to him to interview him middle of the game while he was on the bench, still as a Miami commit at that time. And he gave an answer that should have told everything. I can't show it because I don't want this entire video to get flagged for copyright because of a 5-second clip, but I'll tell you what happened. It's on my YouTube channel, by the way, the main and all kinds of weather YouTube channel. Matt Schick asked him, who are you considering, in response to Cormani McClain saying he would sign January 15th. McClain then paused and he said, Miami. Schick then asked him, anybody else? McClain's response was, yeah. Then a brief pause. And then he added, no, that's all. So foreshadowing itself for what happened 10 days later on January 13th, 2 days before he said he would sign, McClain was on Colorado's campus and crystal balls began rolling in on the 247 sports site that said he would flip to Colorado. January 15th, the day he said that he would sign with a school, came and went, and he did not sign to either Miami or Colorado, which, okay. Clearly, one of two things happen when a kid says he's going to sign on a certain date. He doesn't. One, he's having trouble deciding where to go. Or two, there's some kind of holdup with the NI deal, which I guess could essentially be funneled back into that first reason. But regardless, 4 days later, on January 19th, he publicly announced his flip to Colorado, and thus began a very difficult year for him in Boulder, Colorado. From the outside looking in, it seemed like Cormani McClain was chasing the biggest paycheck and the biggest lights. And that's not a flattering thing to say, but that is just the most basic, and looking at the facts and connecting the obvious dots way to put it that there is. But I think, as we all know, there come risks to big paychecks and bright lights, namely if you don't meet the expectations applied to you in exchange for those paychecks and bright lights. And to hear those in Boulder, Colorado tell it, Cormani McClain did not meet those expectations in a variety of ways. According to multiple reports, as far as I can tell, the first to report it was Denver Sports' Jake Shapiro. McClain struggled with his academics. And I'm not just talking about coursework here. I'm also talking about the fact that his studying of game film and being prepared just weren't there. Those traits just did not exist to the level that they had to exist at. And Deion Sanders quickly grew tired of what he said were McClain's bad habits. And on September 26th, he came out and said this in response to a question about what McClain had to do to play more. Again, I wish I could show it, but I don't want the whole video to get flagged for copyright. So I'm just going to quote exactly what Deion Sanders said. This is a direct quote. "Study and prepare. Be on time for meetings, show up to the darn meetings, understand the scheme, understand what we are doing as a scheme, want to play this game, desire to play this game, desire to be the best in this game, at practice, in the film room, and on your own time. You do know I check game film from each player so I can see who's preparing." And that's not just about Cormani. He made a point to go on and say this. That's not just about Cormani. So if I don't see that, you would be a fool to put somebody else out there who's not prepared. So if I don't see that, you would be a fool to put somebody out there who's not prepared. That's why I don't read off transcripts whenever possible. But yeah, to be fair, as the end of that quote made it very clear, Sanders was talking about a problem that existed well beyond just one person. But he also made it very clear, because he used that question about McClain directly to talk about this general issue, made it pretty clear that Cormani McClain was one of the offenders in this area. And McClain continued to do various things throughout the year that obviously Deion Sanders was less than pleased with. One such notable instance came at the end of the year, when Sanders made a rather off the cuff, I guess, tongue-in-cheek, maybe half-serious comment about Travis Hunter, his star commit, making convenient and strategic trips to the bathroom, quote, like Cormani, end quote. And look, while that comment was clearly a joke, it's also the kind of joke that's only made if there's some semblance of truth to the larger point behind it. Like, those kinds of jokes don't just come out of thin air. They don't just come because you pick a name and you pick a thing that you do at random, like brush your teeth or go to the bathroom or log on to your computer. Like, you don't just pick that just doesn't come out of nowhere. So clearly there was something that happened repeatedly throughout the course of the year. Maybe Deion Sanders told us exactly what it was with the film sessions and the preparation. Maybe it was something different entirely, but clearly Deion Sanders was just fed up with him. And predictably enough, with all the struggles that Deion Sanders pointed to, Cormani McClain struggled quite mightily on the field. His raw talents that made him a 5-star prospect in high school just were not paired with a D1 caliber work ethic. That's not bashing the kid. That's just, the results are what the results are. And by the results are what the results are, I mean that his game tape was just objectively terrible. And Pro Football Focus graded 488 defensive backs who played more than 200 snaps in 2023. And Cormani McClain ranked 475th of those 488. And look, that's not an exact science. It does not definitively prove that Cormani McClain is officially the 475th best defensive back in the country. But Pro Football Focus is, generally speaking, in the ballpark. They don't miss by 150 spots. They may miss by, 5 or 10 spots. You can make an argument that someone who grades 3 spots lower than another is actually better, but they don't miss by dozens or hundreds of spots like that. So clearly there's something to that. And you know what? The margin for error that typically does exist within their ranking system, like some of the grace that you might give them is because like PFF can't know what the guy's assignment was supposed to be, or if the defense audibled into something else, but the player legitimately couldn't hear it because the crowd noise was too loud. So, and he wasn't like trying not to hear it. He just simply couldn't hear it and didn't know he was supposed to be doing something else because of factors outside of his control. So stuff like that has to be baked into some margin of error there. But when you have the game tape that Cormani McClain put out there, combined with the fact that his head coach was calling him out for not being prepared, that 475th rating does not look like a mistake. Sorry, but that's just a matter of this is the game tape, this is the rankings, this is the ranking system, and this is what the head coach is saying. And it paints a pretty clear picture. So with Cormani McClain, by the way, one of those statistics was he missed about 37% of the tackles he attempted. That's really bad. So anyway, Cormani McClain, with his stock having taken a huge hit from his high school days, hit the transfer portal after the season. And he had a parting shot for Deion Sanders on his way out the door. McClain said on a video that he released on YouTube that he wants to play for a real program and doesn't want to play for clicks. I mean, the paradox of saying you don't want to play for clicks in a video that you release on your YouTube channel, which presumably you're doing for clicks because that's why everybody releases any video on YouTube, and includes myself. I want clicks. That paradox is insane. But here is where I go back to the culture that I referenced earlier at Jackson State. There are light years of difference between the HBCU love at Jackson State and Colorado. And at Jackson State, Deion Sanders was stepping into a place that had generations of deeply rooted respect and appreciation and support for its student athletes. So Sanders adding a few doses of swagger and attitude worked. It was perfect because if you pair his glitz and glamour and recruiting ability with the humble and grounded approach that the very nature of that Jackson State program breeds, it's a nice marriage. By themselves, neither of those two ingredients translates to wins. We saw that at Colorado this year. But if you marry the two and the offspring is a hybrid result that can help lead you to success, and we saw that. Jackson State transformed its roster virtually overnight. His career started there during COVID, so that's kind of like a year zero, the way it was for Mike Norvell at FSU. We can't really blame him too much for that. But the offspring of those two ingredients was a hybrid that guided Jackson State to back-to-back undefeated SWAC seasons and SWAC titles. And they nearly pulled off an upset over an FBS team in Louisiana Monroe, only because my boy Houston got ejected for a garbage targeting call on the first drive of the game, and thus he did not play for 90% of that game. Did Jackson State not pull that off? They lost 12-7, but a couple drives at the end kind of made that game. But anyway, the same built-in culture of support that is looking out for their kids' best interests isn't there at Colorado. It's just not there. It's not an HBCU. It doesn't have that built-in proof of concept of genuinely loving the students and the athletes alike, just not just the players, but everyone who goes there is going to be built for a better future. And I'm not calling out Colorado specifically, by the way. I don't know if Colorado is really any worse in that aspect than Nebraska or a Kansas State or a Rutgers or a Purdue or a South Carolina or any other low-level Power 5, now Power 4. But the built-in culture that breeds humble and grounded people isn't there like it is at HBCUs. So you take Deion's brash attitude and all the other bells and whistles he comes with and place it into this, not spectacular environment that's not really any different from 40 or 50 other Power 4 schools. And you don't have that culture of humility and genuine support to mix it together with, and you run the risk of bringing yourself a circus. You get a team of talented players who may or may not mesh well together. You run the risk of there being a bad locker room. And with that, you run the risk of the team not playing together. They're all playing for themselves. And in Deion's defense, he's only been there 1 year. It's very, very possible that he will fix that issue. He can address the team camaraderie issue and the selflessness part this year or in later years. But the point is, in year one, clearly not the right environment for Cormani McClain. And that brings us to the second question. How did Florida get to this point where they're considering him? Well, if you can say nothing else about Florida football under Billy Napier, he has got the culture side of things taken care of. Now, look, it's possible that he might miss on evaluating a kid from a culture standpoint here and there, but he takes that piece of things pretty seriously. Takes that seriously in the recruitment process. He takes that seriously in the eval process before he even bothers to recruit the kid at all. And he takes that seriously once the kids are on campus and in the Gator program. And for that matter, the same thing is true for academics. He takes the academic piece of things very seriously, which is part of why he went and got DJ Douglas from Tulane and Joey Slackman from University of Pennsylvania. But anyway, if there's a place for Cormani McClain, it's either going to be at an HBCU school or a school close to his home in Lakeland with a similarly great culture that's built in. And Florida seems to have that. The problem is that Florida also has 85 players currently on football scholarships. And that is the maximum that you're allowed to have, which means there's not a spot for Cormani McClain on the Gators roster right now. And that brings us to the third question of what would Cormani McClain being on the Florida Gator football team look like? Well, there are two routes Florida could go here. One, Florida could nudge somebody currently on scholarship to transfer to make room for McClain, but that just doesn't seem likely for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is that that's highly unethical and runs the risk of really burning some bridges on the recruiting trail. And as we covered in our last show, Napier being a good, upstanding person and recruiting well go hand in hand. So two reasons right there built into one, which also runs the risk of setting a really bad precedent in the locker room to show so much desperation to add one kid with so much baggage that you force someone else out the door who more likely than not did things the right way to earn that scholarship in the first place. So it's possible that Florida does that, but it does not strike me as likely. The other form that this could take is the much more plausible route. And it's the route that some rumors have already been leaked about being the path for Cormani McClain to come to Florida. And that is the preferred walk-on method, which would give him essentially a 1-year trial run as a walk-on to see if Florida wants to put him on scholarship in 2025. And then if you do, you just take one fewer scholarship player out of high school or the transfer portal the next year, and you reward Cormani McClain's hard work and good behavior with a scholarship. And that right there actually answers the last question. Does Cormani McClain deserve this chance? Because I will admit, when I first heard that Cormani McClain was visiting Florida, my immediate instant instinct was, hell no. No, I'm good. I'm good with Jakeem Jackson. I'm good with Sharif Denson. I like them both to take big leaps as sophomores. I like the transfers that we got in the secondary. I'm chilling here. No need. Cormani McClain turned us down. He burned that bridge. And now he can deal with the consequences of burning that bridge. But that last statement, that last sentence is actually exactly where I stand in the most nuanced and complex way possible. Because, yeah, I stand by the opinion that Cormani McClain burned his bridge to Florida, and there are consequences to that. But the more I think about it, the more I'm open to giving Cormani McClain a chance to cross that river a much harder way. There are consequences to past actions, and the bridge is burned. It's now ash, so you can't just cruise across it in a Lambo or a Ferrari in comfort, but you can jump into the water, fight off the wildlife that's in that water, and swim across and get to the other side, which obviously is a far less pleasant way to get to the other side of that river. But you know what? If you're willing to jump in that water, if you're willing to swim across that river, Florida will take care of him on the other side. I mean, the message, I think, to him is going to be something like, hey, you know what? You torched that bridge and you destroyed it. We're not going to give you another chance to build a second bridge, which, by the way, in this metaphor, comes equipped with a scholarship and massive amounts of NIL money. But while you can't build another bridge, if you show us that you're willing to get to the other side of that river by any means possible, you do that, you swim around all those crocodiles and gators and fish and whatever else is in there, we'll take care of you. We'll reward you for your efforts and you showing us that you're really committed to crossing that river. And to translate that from the metaphor to real life speak, we're not going to give you all the perks we offered you out of high school. You made mistakes and there are consequences for them. And even if we just throw out pettiness and holding grudges and we discard all that, there's just the plain fact that there's no room for you. All 85 scholarship spots are taken. So the offer you had on the table 2 years ago, that's gone. That's out of here. That doesn't exist. But Cormani, if you show us that you've truly learned lessons, if you've truly grown as a person, if you're willing to make changes, you accept this reduced package, we'll give you a fair chance to make it at the University of Florida. Can't guarantee playing time, can't guarantee X amount of NIL money, but we can guarantee that we will give you a fair and legitimate chance to earn back some, if not all, of those initial perks back in due time. That's what I think the message has to be to Cormani McClain. That has to be the offer, because unlike 2 years ago, he has zero leverage now. He is no longer that five-star recruit that you just couldn't miss on. Now his stock has taken severe amounts of damage, and he's seen as a kid with a lot of raw talent still, but who just can't put it together on the field and off the field. And while I remain adamant that Cormani McClain does not deserve the chance to push somebody off of his scholarship, if that's the form that this is going to take, if it's going to go the other way and you make him go the preferred walk-on way, I'm all for that. I am 100% in favor of that, because I do believe in learning lessons and getting second chances. I mean, hell, I wouldn't be where I am right now if not for second chances. I worked for it. I wasn't just handed it. I had to go and prove I was worthy of it. But I got a second chance in my life, and I've made it count. And look, Cormani McClain being a walk-on will not count toward the scholarship allotment. And assuming we don't pay him an exorbitant amount of NIL money, it can't really hurt. There's no downside to having a walk-on added to the Gator roster. The worst thing that happens is he doesn't learn anything from Colorado and just never plays, which comes at a cost of 0 scholarship spots and minimal NIL money. And the best case is we basically get a free cornerback that can be a veteran piece in 2025. And as we all know, players playing for free doesn't happen anymore. So it's a very, very low risk, very, very high reward situation with Cormani McClain if you do the preferred walk-on route. So long story short, I'm wary. I have my doubts about this. The burden of proof is absolutely on Cormani McClain's shoulders to prove me and all his skeptics, for that matter, wrong. We're not the crazy ones for being unsure about this, but if he really truly is committed to putting his head down and going to work and earning things the hard way, I am staunchly behind Cormani McClain. I am 100% in his favor of being given that second chance at the University of Florida. And now I will close the show with the promise that I made at the start. I've said a lot of things on this show that don't make Cormani McClain look excellent. Now, I maintain that I was simply putting out previously stated factual information onto this show. I fact-checked everything I've said, but by going through everything I went through, the show did not make Cormani McClain look great. So here is my promise. Cormani McClain, if you come to Florida and you do the hard work and you earn your spot on this Gator football team and you show us that you're a changed, better person, I promise that I will do a deep, in-depth feature story on an allkindsofweather.com where I will not only admit that I was wrong about you, I will make sure that your grit, your determination, your perseverance, and your growth are all highlighted, because I know the NFL is your dream, and NFL scouts will look at everything that we have just talked about on this show. Look at Spencer Rattler if you don't believe me. His actions on a high school reality TV show so strongly turned off NFL teams that it absolutely destroyed his NFL draft stock. So Cormani, as it stands, the fact is NFL teams are leery of you. But I promise you that if you do the hard work, needed to prove your growth. I will become one of your biggest supporters, and I will personally invest my time and effort to helping you repair your image and shine a light on how much you've grown and matured. I admit that I am a sucker for a comeback story. And you know what? If I've learned nothing else from running in all kinds of weather for the last 10 years, is that everybody loves a good comeback story. So, Cormani, I'm rooting for you. And if you come to Florida and you do everything you're supposed to do, and you work and work and work, and you show that you are a changed guy, I'll be right behind you helping you and make sure that you get the good press that you will then deserve. That's our show. Be sure to check out our merch at inallkindsofweather.com/merch. All the merch featuring that slick new alligator logo that pays homage to all your favorite moments in Gator football history. We got pint glasses here. We got t-shirts, polos, hats, as you can see. Got some slides that are coming soon. Got some mugs. Check it all out. We got also some rivalry dub merch over Tennessee, because it's never a bad time to remind the Vols that we own them from last year. That's still up there. So go ahead and check all that out at inallkindsofweather.com/merch. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. And until then, go Gators. In all kinds of weather, we will all stick together for FLORIDA.